Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Augmenting Reality Meetup, VR and AR in Aerospace. So, for anybody that doesn't know, there's free food at the back. There's still enough, so if anybody wants seconds, they can have it. And there's also free soft drinks and coffee as well. So, this meetup's brought to you. Yes, it is. Yeah. So this meetup's brought to you by Amplified Robot, one of my companies. Oh, wow, going the other way now. By Amplified Robot, which is one of my companies. Digital Jam, the VR and AR Association, and of course Microsoft, who are really kind enough to allow us to use this fantastic space. And also, they're the ones that actually set out the free food and drinks. So, a little round of applause for Microsoft, please. Right, for those of you who don't know me by now, I'm Steve Dan. I'm the co-founder and chief executive chairman of Medical Realities. I'm also the co-chairman of the London chapter of the VR and AR Association, and also the founder and CEO of Amplified Robot. Medical Realities does VR and augmented reality training and education in the medical space, especially for surgeons and medical students. The VR and AR Association is a worldwide organization for the fostering of, really, actually, VR and AR to make it bigger and better. And Amplified Robot is really a solutions provider in the VR and AR space. And also, I organize this meetup. It's my pleasure to do that. So, before we start, we've actually got some students here tonight. And I actually wanted to get one of them to come up. Mohammed is going to come up and just tell you a little bit about where he's from, what they're doing. But of course, it looks as though they're really interested in VR, which is fantastic. Mohammed, here's the mic. The floor is all yours.
Hi, guys. So we're from London Design and Engineering UTC, based in East London. So we have a lot of virtual reality opportunities and augmented reality opportunities at our college slash secondary school. So the way we work is that we get set certain tasks to do virtual reality or augmented reality. So for example, last year we had some stuff to do about water aid. So students actually created a virtual reality scene, which we could try out in our own classrooms, where we have state-of-the-art technology. We have really powerful machines with Xeons, GTX 1080s, and we have HTC Vives, full room-scale virtual reality setups. So we use these technologies that are available to us to basically help us create virtual reality and augmented reality scenes. And what this does for us is that it just allows us to get, prepare ourselves for the future, because virtual reality and augmented reality is where everything is going at the moment. And then when we get set tasks to do in virtual reality and augmented reality, we can just get set to work with them in our classrooms, just as if it was a workplace or something like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well done. All I can say is I wish I was as young as these guys, because they're going to see some amazing changes over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 50 years. We've also got tonight Daniel Kalani. I always have trouble with your surname. And Daniel's got some very interesting things to say about a new project that he's embarked on. He's also the founder of the VR Awards as well. So more from Dan a little bit later. Right, these meetups are all about virtual reality, augmented reality, and mastering new realities.
We have all these technological opportunities, some of which are themselves unsettling, but some of which can also help us improve society.
With virtual reality, we're on the brink of a transformation that is as big as when the Lumiere brothers invented cinema.
The thing that the creative industries need to be considering is how to leverage the technologies and figure out how they can be implemented and adopted in meaningful ways.
Augmented and virtual reality are very powerful platforms that we are going to be able to figure out how to use in ways that can be very beneficial for society.
VR will change creative industries in that it's an entire new art form.
My worry is that you completely lose track of where you are and your identity as a whole, and you can become anyone and your brain will interpret it as reality just like anything else.
If we think about climate change, or if we think about exploitative labor practices around the world, these are topics for which we have too many data sets. No human being can make sense of them, and therefore no human storyteller can create a compelling narrative for others to learn from.
As the artificial intelligence gets more sophisticated, the analysis of that data will be much more thorough.
With AI, we have the ability to mash the data together and create visualizations. When we look at the way AI is being monetized, AI is both used to replace and to augment the creativity that is in the human province. But at the same time, creative industry companies can use AI often to replace people.
Blockchain could do very interesting things in the creative economy, enabling, recording, and rewarding behaviors that we want to see.
I think it really gives power back to the end user or the consumer. What blockchain and things like smart contract really allow to do is decentralize that access to information.
What's happening in this world, we have fear of the future, fear that we're going to lose our jobs, fear that some outside stranger is going to take away our livelihood or something else, and bad actors are exploiting those fears.
Various industry bodies need to get out in front of these technologies and figure out how they can be implemented and adopted in meaningful and responsible ways.
It's a really exciting time to be innovating, but one where we really have to not be as wedded to the business models that have succeeded in the past.
We do not believe that government alone is certainly qualified to bring governance and regulation to these technologies. The forum is bringing together multi-stakeholders to talk about these technologies and how they work together and how we need them to work.
It's up to us as content creators to use that technology to make sure that we're telling stories in the formats that will eventually become more mainstream.
Yes, just to remind you that we are expanding out what we're talking about in augmented reality into blockchain ideas, into AI ideas. So it's not just virtual reality and augmented reality and all the other realities that people are copywriting on the way in between, mixed reality and X reality and whatever else. But let's start by looking at VR in the aerospace industry. This was one of the first sort of uses, actually, of it by Qantas. It's nearly 4 years old, this. It surprised me. So they launched that in sort of just over 4 years ago with Samsung Electronics in Australia. So that they were one of the first airlines to sort of see what you could start to do. And also, I suppose, because they actually have the longest flights, so they want people to do something on the flights as well. That was a test. It actually sort of has continued, and they're actually sort of bringing out new VR experiences, especially where people are going and where they might want to fly to. And in fact, the latest one has just been released. Of course, VR is now used in pilot training as well. This was one of the original pilot training simulators from 1910. This is an actual prototype of really the modern simulators. It's called the Sanders Teacher, and it was created all the way back in 1910. Now, of course, I've got to jump forward a little bit. There was lots of other sort of simulations, especially during the war. The war sort of pushed simulations for pilots, but they're all pretty well mechanical. And there were a couple of electronic ones, but the first sort of head-mounted ones started in 1967. And most of these were worked on by a very good friend of mine, a guy called Tom Furness. And Tom worked for the US Air Force. He was an engineer. And right back from mid-1960s, he actually figured out how they could actually use the head-mounted displays, but actually sort of do it more and more into virtual reality. And he's seen as the godfather of virtual reality because the American military gave him a lot of money. In actual fact, they gave him over $200 million a year, roughly from 1966 until he retired, I think just before the year 2000. And I said to Tom, well, that's an awful lot of money, Tom. He said, yeah, but it's a lot cheaper than crashing a plane or having a pilot die. So that's one of the reasons that they actually put a lot of money into it. Right, this is a 1979 model from McDonnell Douglas when they integrated VR into their head-mounted display already that they had. It's called the Vital, and it was originally just for military use. It's got a head tracker, and it follows the pilot's eye movement to match the computer-generated images. So this is getting quite sophisticated. When you're considering 1979, you could do that, but it was still very clunky. And of course, all the things that the pilot has to do, all has to be done in real time. There can be no delay. This is Tom. He's had a lot of things to do in his illustrious career. Basically, as I say, he virtually invented virtual reality head-mounted displays, especially for use in the military. And he was the first guy, between 1986 and 1989, he really cracked it and created what's called the super cockpit. So that was one of the very first all-simulated virtual reality displays. But of course, now there's a crossover between gaming and training pilots. Oh, sorry.
Virtual reality. It's not just for gaming anymore.
All we do is accelerate, and then it launches us. So, let's go. Afterburner? Sure. Oh man, that's cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm okay with that.
Where else can you test your skills against an adversary? Or land at night in the mountains using night vision goggles? But virtual reality is not just for gaming anymore. It's used in many practical ways, as we learned on our aerospace education night at Squadron 188. We talked about the history and the development of simulators used in flight training, from the early link trainers, where it was a lot more cost-effective to use a simulator for instrument flying and safer, to the development of more modern full-motion simulators used both in civilian and military applications. The next generation of pilots will likely do a lot of their initial training using virtual reality. The Air Force is already using virtual reality simulators in a test program to train pilots. Using off-the-shelf technology, the Air Force has found that virtual reality training has been very effective in preparing pilots before they actually enter an aircraft. Not only is it a very cost-effective way to train versus using legacy simulators or aircraft, it allows students to replay their mission and evaluate their performance and learn from their mistakes.
Of course, if you want to access sitting down, if you want to sort of make it a bit more exciting. And basically, you can buy one of those for 100,000. If you've got to put it in the spare room, it'll be fine. Don't worry. Now, one of the companies which uses virtual reality in its design process in aerospace is Dassault.
At Dassault Aviation, they have long used virtual reality to help design their aircraft before they build the simulators or bend some metal in the real world.
We can, from start, bring our pilots here and they try for themselves the new cockpit design. And they say, okay, maybe I don't like the position of the side stick. Maybe you'd better move the panel a little bit to the left or to the right. Maybe I like the screen bigger or something.
But engineer Igor Fain has taken the idea to a whole new level. He's created a virtual reality system that makes it easy to bring technicians in training behind the cabinets and under the skin of Falcon business jets. The VR system can handle up to 10 people and 1 instructor.
The point of it is that during a real training session, it's 10 trainees and 1 student. And it's way more difficult to be 10 in here than in real life than in virtual ones.
Plenty of legroom, even in the tightest of places. And tracking devices capture and display hand gestures.
The big idea is that you have the ability to go everywhere, even in very narrow spaces, very narrow areas, be 11 in the same spot that is way too small in real life to go inside. And even in this small space, we can look at any parts, have all the information, remove anything, and see everything.
Igor and the team at Dassault's Immersive Center created this experiential training tool by combining off-the-shelf Oculus Rift headsets with down-to-the-rivet detail 3D models created by Dassault's CATIA design software.
That is so cool.
The nice thing is that we already have all this data, and so we can simply load our CATIA data into our system. At Dassault, since it's been more than 30 years that we are investing in CATIA, in 3D, in designing all our aircraft with CATIA, well, this is why we are, I think, a bit ahead in this field.
The virtual training sessions are already underway. Classes so far meet in one place, but the system could be used remotely.
In the future, we can imagine a distance learning system where one instructor is in Paris and the trainees are all across the world and having a live presentation from an instructor somewhere else of the aircraft. Maybe that could be something interesting, and then we have pretty much no limits except the bandwidth.
The virtual reality future is closer than I thought.
As we designed it.
Literally.
When you see the green, don't try to
Right, now, obviously NASA had a big influence on virtual reality and augmented reality. This headset is very interesting because it's the start of adding audio into it. In actual fact, it's the start of adding binaural audio into it as well. It's designed by a guy called Scott Foster, who had a company called Crystal River Engineering. And basically, he got a contract from NASA to figure out how to do 360-degree sound properly for virtual reality. And that's how he started off. And so basically, he owns some of the main patents for binaural sound. But of course, NASA has used VR in lots of different ways.
Right now we're here at the VR lab, Virtual Reality Lab, and it's a graphical rendering program that models everything on the space station from decals to fluid lines, electrical lines, anything that the crew might see outside on the space station. We model in here so that when they go outside, they feel like they've already been there because they've been here in the virtual world. So when we put the crew members in the helmets, they get this 3D virtual world of this space station. And we can put them anywhere on the space station, in the Russian segment or the US segment, the Japanese or European segments. And what they'll do is find out whether the work site works for them, the way the suit works, and whether they're in the right place to be able to handle the tools, be able to take the unit out and be able to replace the unit if they need to. Up on top is the tracking system, and that allows us to track the motion of the head and where he's pointed so that we can change the scene inside that he's looking at. Same thing with the hands. We also have force sensors inside the palms so that we know when he grabs his hands, and we can model that in the simulator. It is something that was actually built by the engineers here. He built the entire helmet in his garage.
Yeah, so NASA and the engineers built that in his garage. This video is over 6 years old. But if you go to NASA now, they're still using it. The only thing they've done is that they've taken off some of the tape and put NASA decals all over it. So you can have a go at it as well. So a little bit about the history of NASA very quickly.
Ignition sequence start. All engines up.
We have taken tremendous steps.
We choose to go to the moon before this decade is out.
We have achieved the earth-shaking, the breathtaking, the groundbreaking, and left a mark in the heavens. Our successes build one upon another and amplify what is possible. It's time we take the next great leap. We're building the next chapter of American exploration, returning to the moon to stay, so we can go beyond to Mars, to expand what's possible and further our understanding. The architecture for these missions is already taking shape. We will go with new systems, bold designs, and a sustainable mission. You can hear it, taste it, touch it. We are going. We are training, testing, pressing our pioneering spirit into every component, defining our resolve with every line of code, and securing our success with every welcomed partnership. This is not hypothetical. This is not about flags and footprints. This is about sustainable science and feeding forward the advance of the human spirit. Because we are the pioneers, the star sailors, the thinkers, the visionaries, the doers. And because we stand on the shoulders of the giants to go farther than humanity has ever been, we will add our names to the rolls of the greatest adventurers in history. Every day, every mission, we advance this calling. We are NASA. And after 60 years, we're just getting started.
And we owe a great debt of thanks to NASA, the American military, especially Tom Furness and people like that, and Walt Disney for keeping the flame of VR burning during the 1990s when it almost was extinguished. Now, I want to show a little video here. This is from a fantastic company in Toronto, in Canada, called Felix and Paul. They make brilliant films. This film actually is showing what they're doing about space exploration. Will be if it starts up.
So in the biggest picture, space exploration is our future, because someday we're either going to destroy the Earth or the sun is going to blow up. So our future as a human race is out there in the universe. Just like the early Europeans came over and discovered the Western world and so forth, it's our future to do that. The contributions we make are small steps along the way in a continuum, into the very distant future.
When I got the call from Peggy Whitson, it was a very emotional call, only because I never dreamed that I would have been one of the 9 Americans that the U.S. selected that year. Guys. One of the nice things about our crew is that we have a common mission. And because we have this common mission, we can work together towards that goal. The differences kind of get lost, and so the common things start to stand out. And so one of the things we want to really do is understand our universe, what happened. And if we can understand what happened in our solar system, with our planet, with our moon, understanding that will help us maybe prevent things from occurring in the future.
Space exploration is about opening your mind. And I think we all had this desire in us from the time we were little kids, is to find out what's over the next hill. We always want to go and explore. When I was a little kid, I was a little bit disappointed because I thought everything was invented. And, you know, when I finally went to test pilot school and understand how you math model and how you come up with new aircraft, or how you build a spacecraft, or even the possibilities beyond just building the spacecraft, but living in space and being in space and traveling farther in space, you know, there's so much more to invent.
The pace of development is picking up, and the vision of getting to Mars is becoming real. And I think the next 30 years are going to be a great chapter in the history of human space exploration. Fast forward through generations and generations and generations, we're going to have humans living on other planets within the universe, because that's our future.
This film is obviously in 360. It's on the Oculus. If you get a chance to see it, I highly advise you to do it, because it's really cool. It's part of a series they're doing with Oculus, space and exploration about our planet as well. And one of the good things that's happening is NASA and Felix and Paul are getting together with Time, to actually create the world's first 360 live streaming from the Earth station orbiting above us. And also they're going to do the world's first 360-degree live spacewalk. That's happening very soon.
You're transferring to orbiter internal.
6, 7, 12, and 13.
There's a lot that goes into sending anything up into space.
QB2 copies.
Copy that, guys.
Luca from Houston, give us the status.
The dream was always to transport the viewer to space and feel like they have truly been to the International Space Station.
We've never attempted something of this degree. The complexity, the magnitude.
The first principle is placing the camera where a person could be.
Everywhere I think you're going to want that is where people won't want to put it.
Everything is being scrutinized at every step of the way. It's a closed system, and if anything goes wrong, you can't call the fire department in space. Cameras have been sent up before, but none with this complexity.
I think there are some subject matters that are better experienced. Virtual reality is the perfect medium.
There's something that's so intangible about living in zero gravity.
Only trained astronauts live and work on the International Space Station. The actual purpose of the work,
We're going for EVA.
It's ultimately about all of us.
Can you guys see this? Awesome.
So watch out out for that. I think it's going to be really cool. Of course, we've talked just about virtual reality up until now. Let's talk a little bit about augmented reality. And in actual fact, this guy, Thomas Caudle, invented the term augmented reality in 1990. He's working for Boeing, and they wanted an easy way of actually figuring out where to put all the wire looms, because there's miles and miles of wiring in Boeing aircraft. And they wanted to go and get rid of their tech manuals. And in fact, the tech manual for a Boeing 747 actually is 2 stacks of 6-foot-high manuals you have to go through to actually figure out where to put everything and how to fix everything. So that's why they were very interested in getting into augmented reality very early on. Now jump forward. Use the HoloLens to do exactly the same thing.
It can also present hazard areas in new, unique ways.
Please be aware of the areas marked as hazardous. In a real-life scenario, these areas must be clear for safety when you start an engine.
Now that I'm aware of the safe areas, we can continue to learn in ways not possible in the real world. This is the throttle control from the cockpit. Now I can easily understand how the fuel system reacts to it.
The fuel passes through each part of the system, being filtered, heated, and pressurized, ensuring optimum engine performance.
In this short amount of time, Arantxa was able to switch from her daily work to dive into an important training where she learned about a newly upgraded airplane engine. HoloLens gave her the flexibility to learn in any location, at any scale, and at her own pace.
I'm sure Microsoft are very pleased that I took the HoloLens and put it up there. Next week in the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, they're actually going to unveil the HoloLens 2. So it's going to be very exciting. I think they're going to do big things with it, but they're keeping things very tightly under wraps. So next time I see you, I'll be able to tell you a bit more about that. But of course, HoloLens is also used by NASA as well.
At NASA, we're excited to apply mixed reality technologies to the challenges we're facing in space exploration. Through a collaboration with Microsoft, we're building applications to support engineers responsible for the design and assembly of spacecraft, astronauts working on the International Space Station, and scientists are now using our Mars tool on-site in mission operations.
On-site's a powerful tool for our scientists and engineers to explore Mars. But because we always felt it shouldn't remain only within NASA, we've taken the core of on-site and made an amazing experience that allows the public to explore the Red Planet. We call this new experience Destination Mars.
Mars can be a lonely place, so we've created holographic captures of an astronaut and a member of the Curiosity rover team to be our guides on this journey. And this gave us an opportunity to immortalize a hero.
Hi there, I'm Buzz Aldrin.
To help Buzz explain how we're doing science on Mars today is Curiosity rover driver Arissa Hines.
Welcome to my office.
We can put the public, the rover and Arissa together at the exact place where Curiosity made some of its most amazing discoveries.
We're looking forward to opening the Destination Mars exhibit at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex in summer 2016. We can't wait to share this journey with the world.
Let's go to Mars.
So that's really sort of brought us full circle round for this evening. So that concludes my little portion of this evening. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask me about at the back? Okay, Kieran, you've got to do a bit of running. Fine.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
My question is about Disney. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about where VR was in the 90s and what Disney did to stop the demise, as it were. The second part of the question, or unrelated, as it were, that the guy who was at Dassault said something about bandwidth, and I was just wondering what the impact of or the effect, the dynamics of bandwidth are on VR, particularly for remote working.
Collaboration, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, well, back in 1989, VR was going to be the next big thing. It was going to take over the world, and everybody involved in it was going to make an absolute fortune. I think that sort of kept going for about 4 years, possibly 5 at a stretch, before it completely fell apart. And it fell apart really because the computing power and the technology of the time wasn't up to the imagination and what everybody wanted to do. It was very clunky. There was a UK company, was actually one of the forefronts of VR, and they did a lot of arcade games and things like that. And in actual fact, even up until, I think about 3 years ago, when the Trocadero was still going in Piccadilly, you could actually still go into one of their bumper cars and actually have a VR ride. So that had been going since about 1992. So they got their money's worth out of that. But honestly, apart from that, the experience was awful. And of course, it was very expensive. The virtual reality headsets then were minimum of about $25,000. So it really wasn't sort of practical. It was practical on a big scale, practical on a scale of people with money, whether that was the military, whether it was the NASA, or whether it was something like Walt Disney. Walt Disney and that company has always been at the forefront of doing a lot of new technology, and they kept faith with VR. Sometime later this year, we're going to have one of the guys who was one of the Imagineers at Walt Disney talk about that and about what they were doing and what they're doing now. And he's fully all into what they call out-of-home experiences, especially in virtual reality. So he'll be able to explain an awful lot more about exactly the rides that they were still doing. But it's amazing that they kept faith with it and they kept putting research and development money into this. A lot of people have been worried when VR sort of came into the forefront, and they were going, oh, well, it's, you know, it'll make you sick, it'll make you ill, it'll make you go blind, all these sort of things. But in actual fact, we've got over 35 years of data from companies like Walt Disney and organizations like the American military and the US Air Force and NASA, because they've been through all this and they've actually managed to sort of overcome it. And now that's one of the reasons we know how to get things right now. So if you ever put in a virtual reality experience now and you feel nauseous, then the company that has put that together has done it very badly, because it's almost more impossible to do it now than it is to not do it. What was the other question? To answer? Oh, the bandwidth. Yeah, basically, yeah. He was Dassault, one of the first companies to try that. They were putting together 10 headsets, and those 10 headsets could be either in the same room or in the same factory, or they could be around the world. The bandwidth is getting less and less that you need. The two guys standing at the back of the room there, Matt, who's the CEO of Medical Realities in Kieran, who help us run these meetups in Kieran's the CTO. So they'll tell you more about that. But the good thing about it is that it's getting a lot easier. The bandwidth isn't really going to be much of a problem. Of course, in augmented reality and really sort of mobile augmented reality, the onset of 5G is going to be a big improvement as well. So I don't think that's going to be a massive concern going forward. Yeah.
Right.
thanks, Steve, for all this exciting high-end application of VR and AR in aerospace context. But can you comment on the current, whether we have any successful examples of taking VR and AR aerospace into schools and universities in this country, please?
Right, that's a very good question. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you of any actual things. Just apocryphally, I know that there are, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and better. I think that the guys here are sort of examples of that, because there's no doubt that virtual reality and augmented reality are going to make a big difference in training, but also in education as well. So I think it's really a sort of a no-brainer from that point of view. As with all these things, we're still sort of struggling at the moment. The headsets are getting better, and the content's getting better. They both have to sort of get better together, and soon we're going to reach a sort of sweet spot. I know there's a lot of schools using virtual reality training. In fact, there's a company called Immersive VR, which is just all about training and education. And they launched very successfully on the stock market about a year ago, I think. Yeah. So it's a sort of, yeah. So I think the future is going to be really good. That's one of the reasons I was saying, yeah, I wish I was as young as these guys at the back here, because, yeah, I'd really like to go to school if there was VR and AR going on as well. Great. Okay. I want to introduce you to Daniel. Now, Daniel I've known for a while, and he's done a lot of really interesting things. So now Kieran's actually going to do some fantastic technical manipulation while Daniel and I have a little chat. So, Daniel, I first sort of, one of the things I really know you for is that you look after the VR awards, which you started off?
Yeah, so back in 2016, actually, we first discussed the idea of being able to do something that recognized outstanding achievement within the virtual reality industry. So that first went into place in 2017, hosted here in central London. We had another successful year last year, and we're going into our third year as well this year. So it's been a fantastic kind of time with that.
That's brilliant. And right, now you're going to talk about something else now, aren't you? So,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, well, I'll just grab the...
Yeah, sure, the clicker. So I'll leave it to you. So, but also what Daniel's doing now with your new venture as well, AIXR.
Yes, the Academy of International Extended Reality, but AIXR for short.
Fantastic.
That's the easy way to say it.
Great.
Okay.
Well, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, so if you don't know me, I'm Daniel Coliani. I'm the chief executive of AIXR. And this was very, very recent for us in terms of a transition where everything related to the VR awards is actually now underneath AIXR as well in what we do. So to give you a bit of context about what I'll be talking about today is, if we go next, there you go. So a lot of the data that we have here is actually from the VR awards itself. We have 500 nominations across the board from an international perspective. It's quite an international collaborative effort in terms of the kind of companies we have, from real estate and architecture through to areas of out-of-home entertainment, through to startups in educational, social impact, all of the different areas that covers a really, really broad spectrum of virtual reality. So a lot of the data that we're kind of highlighting and talking about today is directly from our nominees in kind of qualitative research that we've done with them. And on a second kind of basis with this, we host a VR advisory panel as well. Some of the names here you might actually recognize. So we have collaborative research and efforts with a lot of the people actually on here, and I believe Joanna Popper as well from HP is joining us kind of next week as well. So with all of the individuals on here, we've come up with a lot of different research and a lot of different discussions. But the key thing for us going forward with what we're doing is making sure that we put procedures into place to be able to fix industry problems, fix industry challenges, and be able to help a lot of startups and smaller different companies across the spectrum in VR and AR. So that's kind of the basis of what we're talking about. And just a bit of connotation as well, AIXR is an independent, not-for-profit trade body for the VR and AR kind of immersive industries. So I guess a few of the challenges, and I guess a few of you might know it in here, is that how many of you actually have a couple of £1,000 to spend on a VR headset? Not many, unless you can ask finance or some R&D research for that. The brunt of it is, and a lot of the discussions is, that VR headsets are still too expensive, especially when you think about the actual PCs that are involved and a lot of the other things. And this is shown actually by, if you just look at the Oculus Rift. The great thing is that pricing is going down dramatically for VR headsets. So for the Oculus Rift in particular, in 2016, it would have cost you $17,000, $18,000 just to be able to use a VR headset. But now if we fast forward to today, it will only cost you roughly about $848 if you kind of count in the VR-ready PCs that Oculus make, and also the HMD and the controllers with that. But of course, this is also being accelerated with things like the Quest, which is going to be completely kind of irrelevant to PC, so it's going to make VR a lot more accessible. So I guess this is one of the main hurdles in terms of stuff that you don't actually have control of, and this is definitely in the realm of hardware developers being able to make their software a lot more affordable going forward. And there's a little bit of a comparison there, just to show you the stark difference between 2016 and 2018 on the Oculus Rift. So if we kind of fast forward a bit now, the fact is that the actual market size for VR and AR isn't incredibly massive in the reality of things. But when we actually look into it in a lot more details, the key thing is with mobiles. If we just take mobiles, for example, there's 2.5 billion estimated users of smartphones right now today. So if I was to say that 10 years ago, however, everyone would have thought I was crazy. And that's the same with VR, in the fact that the size in the market there is actually going to expand a lot better and a lot bigger within the next few years. And that's the same for AR as well. In the fact that if we actually, and as Steve actually mentioned it before in terms of 5G, and I'll mention the relevance of what 5G actually has to AR and VR as well. If we look at 4G down here, these are the actual theoreticals and actuals. So obviously, theoretically, the bandwidth cap for actual 5G is around 10 gigabits per second. But the actuals are going to be much lower than that in reality to begin with. But if we look at that, that's still a very, very stark difference between the actuals of 4G and the actuals of 5G. But the most important thing with this is not just the speeds, but it's also the latency. So we mentioned a question back there earlier, which was all about the bandwidth with this. The key thing is that with 5G, it's all about being able to make it a less than 1 millisecond latency on this. And this makes a huge, huge difference for VR and AR in the fact that we can do a lot of the rendering in the cloud. It's why people like Improbable get masses and masses of sums of investment, because the reality is a lot of the actual rendering that's going to happen within augmented reality is going to be done via the cloud and then brought back to the device, making a device a lot cheaper and making a device a lot smaller as well, which is why glasses and AR glasses, non-bulky things, are going to be much, much more susceptible kind of in the future as well. And obviously, this, speaking with a lot of analysts in the industry, it's really interesting they're testing 5G on a much larger scale in South Africa at the moment to be able to get it into places like London, cities in San Francisco and Los Angeles and kind of across the world. But once this actually comes into effect, a lot of analysis are predicting 2020 as the year that a lot of this actually comes into effect a lot better, then we can expect the market size to kind of almost double overnight with the inception of kind of 5G. So when we look at this as well, the big problem with VR and AR is, from a consumer perspective, everyone thinks it's about games and entertainment. But the stark reality of it is a lot of the money, and I'll mention this in a bit as well, is to do with business applications like aerospace, like architecture, like design, all of those different areas. And this is one of the challenges that a lot of people face when they first go in or jump into making something in VR, is they think, oh, I'm going to make a VR game. But the reality is that you can make a lot more money and also make a bigger impact on the world by actually focusing on some of the enterprise solutions that VR can really fix within our industry. Kind of with this as well is a big problem and a big challenge that was identified along the way is that when VR and AR kind of first kind of hit the mass markets, is there's a lot of chances and a lot of cowboys that jump on and think, I'm going to make a quick buck here. Now, they're making some money, which is great for them, but this actually harms the industry in a much, much bigger way in the fact that when you first jump into VR, you're getting a really, really bad experience, which is why one of the first things that we say, if you're ever going to show someone anything in VR or AR, is don't, for whatever you do, give them a roller coaster experience. At the end of the day, it's about, and this falls onto developers, it's about being able to make experiences that are actually quality driven. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to drive this industry forward with the advancement of the hardware without real quality experiences on this. And that's kind of reinforces my point there. And if we go on to that as well, roughly 1/3 of the population is actually highly susceptible to motion sickness, which is why when Steve mentioned as well earlier today about being able to look back at the research of what people are doing in kind of VR and AR and what they've done, is that a lot of people apply the same mechanics that they are using within kind of standard 2D games and not really thinking about how that actually will work in a VR application. So there's some really great examples. A lot of people are thinking of different ways to do it, such as teleportation, such as being able to use different types of locomotion. And it's really key to be able to actually do your research, and there's a lot of research out there on what works and what doesn't work. And along with this, we're actually working to compile all of the different data sources so it's easier for developers to actually understand the different types of locomotion to reduce things like motion sickness. So a few of the other kind of problems with kind of first bad experiences is being able to actually implement innovative features like the different styles of locomotion. And also art style seems to be a real big one in terms of some of the challenges, is that a lot of developers jump into VR thinking that, okay, I can make a really real life, real realism experience, which doesn't really work as well for some of the people working on kind of lower end PC rigs or things within VR. But the fact is there's a ton of research out there that shows, and this goes, for example, if any of you have tried Ritchie's plank in here, for example, is that a VR experience does not need to be highly realistic for it to be an amazing and effective, emotionally driven experience, for example. You can have really simple graphics, and it will still trick your mind into being able to be a fantastic experience that you will go away and remember. And also, there's a few other things that you can do within kind of what I mentioned here as well that will kind of fix this up a bit. So like I mentioned before, money is really with the business, which is why you'll see a lot at the moment of location-based entertainment or out-of-home entertainment. For example, Vicky Dobbs, who's part of our VR advisory panel, mentioned that the reason that they use out-of-home entertainment is because, not because it's going to make them more money, but it's actually because of the fact that when they take an IP like Star Wars, being able to put that into a consumer device in someone's home at the moment is not an effective way to tell the story. For them, they'd rather be able to show a full-on experience that VR is made to be able to highlight and showcase, rather than just porting something that they make in the void, for example, and putting that straight into someone's house, because it's nowhere near the same experience that you can have. So I guess with a lot of this, it's about thinking about where best placed is your VR experience, for example. Is it going to be best being in someone's house? Is it going to be best going to an art exhibition? For example, there's one that I really highly recommend at the moment at the Saatchi Gallery, which is an ocean of air. Really fantastic experience where, I won't ruin it for you if you want to go and see it, but it uses different mechanics such as your heart rate and the way you breathe. So when I mentioned about using things like innovative technology and thinking about the different angles that you can use with this, such as art installations, such as aerospace applications, things like that, it's about looking at how you apply the technology in a different way. So with this as well, and this is mainly to do with kind of our job or the industry's job, it's about encouraging the businesses to really pick up and use VR and AR. Because a lot of the companies are very scared to jump into a new technology without really realizing what they can do with it. So when we kind of mention this, it's a much, much bigger problem or a bit bigger challenge than people realize, because the government's funding a lot of research around different trials and stuff. For example, there's a Innovate funding round at the moment, which is all about being able to encourage SMEs to use productivity boosting technology, such as VR or AR would fall under that remit. Because the fact is that SMEs in particular don't know how to use the technology in an effective way. So that challenge in particular is one that industry bodies, governments, and things are looking to be able to overcome in a fairly kind of small time frame at the moment. And this goes on to not just businesses, but actually educating your clients. So if you are making an enterprise solution, there's countless times that I've spoken to large creative agencies that are making VR experiences for a client. And often or not, it's because that client's come to them and said, we need a VR experience. They don't really think about why they need a VR experience. They're just like, okay, well, VR is a big thing, or AR is a really big thing. It's trendy to be in. But they don't think about, okay, does this application actually think that it needs to be in VR? So it's about actually taking it back a step. Don't just think, okay, let's just make something in VR. But it's about making something that is practical for the use of VR, like a Star Wars IP going into a out-of-home entertainment experience. Because at the end of the day, it's a lot of consumers and a lot of users aren't really going to think about downloading another app out of the 50 or so apps they already have on their phone to just put something else in a VR or AR experience onto their device. It needs to be thought out a lot more clearer. So it's your job, really, and our job, to be able to educate the clients on the fact that, is this experience worthwhile? Okay, how are we going to make it worthwhile? And talk about the practicalities, because there's so many times that industries or companies will think, okay, well, I want this camera to be flying down there. Okay, that's great. It's going to show all of your different things that you're doing, but hang on a minute. All of a sudden, you've got a stationary person flying kind of through there, and then you've got Vomit Comet Central there. So it's about educating them, taking them back to the roots of it, and really thinking about, is it necessary? Is it really necessary to be in VR and AR? Because there's a lot of applications that are fantastic, and they really deserve to be in VR, AR, or XR. Just take the 360 kind of experience that we saw earlier from Felix and Paul Studios. That kind of experience lends itself well to something in VR and AR, because it's a transformative experience where people don't really get to go into space that often. So going with this as well is that, and this one's actually a big one for me in particular, is that VR or XR always gets shown at expos or festivals. But when we actually think about it in particular, that is probably the worst, single most worst place to actually try a VR experience, and particularly for the first time. It's loud, it's noisy, you look like an idiot when you put on a VR headset. It's going to go on social media with different things, which is great for the company, but some people feel self-conscious about that. And it's not the actual ideal place to do it. For example, if I go back to this actually experience, that one was a really ideal place for someone who has never tried VR, and it was actually great with me because I went with someone who's been very, very experienced and has done a lot of application building in VR, actually. But there was actually 3 women, probably in their 80s, who'd never, ever tried VR, and I was speaking to them about it. And this was the first time they tried it, and I can tell you now, the entire experience was them going, oh, wow, because they could not get over the fact of how amazing it was. Now, if they had tried that same experience in a setting where it's very, very loud, there's people going through, people are queuing up, there's lots of children wanting to get on the headset before someone else, they're not going to have nearly the same impact or nearly the same experience. So I urge you, if you're going to be trying out or trying to get your experience into a festival or into an expo or something else, it's about trying to think, okay, how do I actually maximize that experience for someone? How can I make them feel more comfortable in that experience? Can we put them behind more of a closed-off place where they get to feel that experience more kind of personal? The Saatchi experience, for example, was only 6 people, and you had your own private kind of area for that. But it's fantastic still because you can still take photos of it. You can still kind of share the experience and the fact that there's kind of stuff going on around you. But it's about maximizing that experience for that one individual, not just the masses. And also, who really wants to put on a headset after it's really, really sweaty and you've just had kind of loads and loads of people on? So think about the other kind of things around that, in the fact that make sure you keep hygiene standards high on that. Make sure you think about the different kind of headsets that you might be using for that, and develop it around the individual as well as the experience itself. So that kind of segues nicely onto user experience as well. So get it off the show floor, but this also goes back to manufacturers and the fact that something like we have this at our office all the time. We have 2 different makes of headsets, and it's funny for a company that's all around XR. We hardly ever go into VR at the moment because of the pure fact that it would take us 20 minutes to troubleshoot a problem with that PC. So it's about trying to maximize that user experience where I can take something like the Go or the Quest straight out of my bag, put it on, and then boom, I'm in VR. So that goes back onto the manufacturers who are kind of doing that, but you can apply the other areas of this talk to be able to maximize that user experience as well. And kind of segueing on with that as well, it's about the pace of the industry in general. So one of the clear things that we identify in our advisory panels and some of the research that we do is that right now, VR and AR is a nice to have. It's like when you first had a phone in the fact that kind of back when they kind of were starting to become more mainstream, in the fact that it was more of a nice to have. If you had that little bit of extra cash, you can try out something or you can try doing this. It makes your life a little bit easier. But at this very point in time, XR is not a must-have. So one of the things that we're looking at and trying to encourage developers and manufacturers and different people within the industry is looking at, okay, how do we transition something like VR and AR from a nice-to-have to a must-have for the masses to be able to get those 2.5 billion devices like there are with mobile smartphones. So part of that is progressing kind of naturally with that by the companies actually investing a lot more money, a lot more time into R&D around this, learning from previous mistakes back in the 90s as well, and really taking this kind of forward. And this one actually in particular is always very, very interesting for us because it's a fact at the moment that there isn't quality recruitment for the large studios or the different studios trying to develop XR solutions. The problem is this stems back from universities or higher educational institutions who are taking things like game courses and then just modifying that ever so slightly to include or incorporate XR. The fact is that that does not work. We've seen that time and time before. We've worked with so many different universities now, or speaking with so many different universities about this, that we help them actually figure out what the course and syllabus has to look like. But in particular, it's about actually thinking about, okay, so I could do a games course that's VR related or AR related, or actually I could think about the practical elements around construction, aerospace, design, all of these different areas that make up a proper VR solution here. So that's kind of one angle of it. But the fact is as well is that a lot of the people that are making, or larger studios or companies that are making XR solutions, they're taking a lot of people from the games industry and just popping them straight into VR because they know how to use something like Unity or Unreal, which is great, but the training and the information around what makes a quality XR experience is not there for those individuals yet. So it's down to those companies to actually take it back a step, apply that R&D research that's been done ages ago and actually educate the workforce and the game designers into transitioning into XR in a much, much better and fulfilled kind of pipeline. Another issue looking at this as well is funding versus return. A big, big issue that we had in the VR industry in particular was that so much investment went into loads of different VR experiences because there was a gold mine. It was a bit of a bubble. Loads of investors were like, okay, this is going to make me lots of money. I'm going to put lots of money into this. The problem is that we're now 4 years down the line from those initial investments, and a lot of those companies aren't really doing very well because they were overhyped, oversold. Now, this is great for those companies who got that initial investment, but the fact is it harms the industry in the long term because it's not doing any good in terms of wanting new investors to invest in new products. And funny enough, a lot of the companies that we've spoken to that received that early investment have pretty much gone into kind of a hibernation mode where they're really trying to lower down their cash burn rate to be able to wait it out for that 2020 kind of boom of kind of 5G, really. So I do urge people to be cautious when they are kind of seeking that funding, is really think about the return and how fast you can offer that return. Because the reality is that investment isn't nearly as much as what it was. And that's because a lot more investors are now cautious, and rightly so, of funding experiences that really are going to get them a return within the next kind of 3 years, or have potential to grow on a further scale on this. Another problem as well is that, and we find this quite funny within our kind of practices and what we do, is that you'll hardly ever see anymore news around VR. 1 year ago, when VR was a lot more trendy and a lot more hot, you'll see so many articles, no matter what it was. It could be something really, really boring, but it would come out because it had the word VR in it. Now you see that with AR, or you see that with AI or blockchain or whatever trendy kind of jargon or term there is at the moment. But the problem is that the media coverage that's out there is not clickbaity enough for them. It's not driving them enough traffic anymore, as it used to be. So it's about being able to convey better media relations with the different companies that are covering VR and AR, and being able to highlight and showcase projects that are actually making a big difference within our industry. Because the countless articles that we see from the same publications that VR is dead, and then you see maybe a month earlier they put in an article which was, VR is amazing, VR is alive. It's repetitive and it happens so much. And the media companies are at fault for that. Okay, so I wanted to, sorry about how fast I was going. I just wanted to kind of cover and really make sure that I could get through on a surface level what some of the challenges are facing at the moment in the industry. But a lot of it seems like doom and gloom in terms of the fact that there are a lot of challenges. We are an early industry still. There is a lot to get over, but it's the pioneers that are in this room that are making that happen. So this was from 2017 now, actually, from our first VR Awards we did. But we put together a very short video which highlights the past of VR, kind of where it was and where it's going. So a few of the experiences might be a bit old in here now, but hopefully it gives you some inspiration and a good idea about there may be challenges, but we overcome them as a whole.
Known as virtual reality, or VR, this new technology uses pictures and sounds to wrap around your senses. Imagine a place and you'll be able to step into it. Conjure up a dream and you'll be able to fly through it.
It's unreal. It's different. And it's so natural that when you experience it, it's something that people come out of the system and say, wow, that's unreal.
For those of us not all up in the latest technology, virtual reality is something like a video game, only it's three-dimensional. It makes you feel as if you are part of what you're looking at. It's been used to train pilots, it's been used to entertain. We've put it on the agenda because it may have another very important application.
To enter this illusory computer graphic world, people wear special glasses which incorporate a liquid crystal television screen, and they wear gloves called data gloves. This is an electronic 3D image of what we got it.
neighborhoods. Right now, for example, virtual reality theaters are being planned all over the world. And this fall, Sega plans to market the first affordable VR helmet for home use.
Okay, great, thank you. So I hope you found this talk informative. It was a bit surface level, but if you want more information on it, Steve, I'm sure we could send the slides to everyone that was in the room today as well. Great, so also myself and Luke are here as well, who'll be able to chat a little bit more kind of one-to-one with everyone.
All right, I know you've got some questions.
Yeah, sure.
Just one quick question. I know the industry is quite young. I wonder if there have been any sort of studies or is anybody following the prolonged use of virtual reality devices on sort of the eyes and also maybe patterns in the brain?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question. So funny enough, I was actually on a phone call this morning with Leeds University. A really good friend of mine there, Dr. Facile, I can never pronounce his name right. But they actually did a study, which is more primarily around children. But they did a study on the use of VR, prolonged exposure, for younger people in particular that are using VR on a daily basis. I wrote a guide not too long ago, which was all about kind of how long you should be in VR and the breaks that you should take. But there is research out there. There's a white paper out there which was done by that Leeds University in partnership with, I think, We Are VR, which I can definitely link you to afterwards. But there is other research going on, such as XRA, which is a combination of Google, HTC, Sony, all of the actual studios. I think it's a group of 5. But they are producing research that they have collected as manufacturers of headsets on this precise data and best practices for developers that are kind of using that as well.
Yeah, and also, as I said before, there's about 40 years worth of data. So ask me, and I'll send you all those as well. Okay.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Daniel. I'm pleased that you mentioned about motion sickness. I think the wow factor in VR is when it comes down to 3D. And of course, the early VR was not 3D at all. It was pseudo 3D, but certainly not real 3D. And because one of the challenges, not only in terms of motion sickness, a fair percentage of the population is 3D blind. So, I mean, this is another area that needs to be considered.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. I think some of the research that's out there on that definitely is trying to combat those different areas of motion sickness and different things. I myself I'm very susceptible to motion sickness, but I love VR. So often or not, I'll stay in an experience for maybe an hour or so. Obviously, prolonged exposure to that does not do you well once you get out. Funny enough, we produced a video for Google Earth VR. For the VR World 2018, we took everyone at the show through Africa using Google Earth VR on a live performance with a fantastic company called One Drum, who have done fantastic stuff in the space. But in the recording of that, we were recording directly through the lens and actually in Google Earth VR. I can't tell you how many times we had to swap out or had to make sure that when we were flying through the countries, that we didn't be sick. But it was like 6 hours of filming to come straight on that, swapping out with 3 or so different people to make sure that we weren't susceptible to those things. So I think there's a lot more that can be done in the space for motion sickness that developers aren't really thinking about. Not necessarily deliberately not thinking about, but because they're used to taking something from a 2D world and just throwing it into VR. Or thrown it into 3D without necessarily thinking of the implications.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned people try to quickly translate games that have been successful into VR, that was where a big problem was. And maybe no names, but Sony really need a good smack because their first 40 titles in virtual reality, 36 of them were unwatchable because they were trying to transport very quickly 2D gaming into virtual reality. And virtual reality is a completely new medium. You've got to think of it in a completely new and different way. And now, I mean, so they're learning by their mistakes. But yeah, it was a big mistake. And of course, if people have bad experiences right at the very start, it's going to put them off. So we don't want that. We want people to have good experiences all the time.
I think one interesting thing as well on that is that a lot of it has to do with also the frame rate. Is making sure that you can achieve that constant 90 frames per second. Otherwise, it's not going to be as bearable of an experience. Now, Sony realized their mistakes early on, which is why now developers have a much harder time developing for PSVR because they have such a strict process now in the fact that if you just drop 1 frame in PSVR, then your experience won't get through. So I was speaking with one developer in particular who they always had this one particular version part of their VR game where if you looked at this certain object, because of the mechanics of the game and the fact that lots of things still happen in the background, it would cause it to drop by 1 frame from 90 to 89, which got the game declined. So they had to come up with a really inventive solution to just make sure that that particular experience, and I think it was something to do with garbage trucks going through, or something like that, where they came up with a creative solution to get through the Q&A, the quality testing for that. So there are things going into place now, but people need to be mindful of the fact that people with lower end rigs need to have a VR experience that runs at 90 frames per second.
Yeah. Or 120.
At least, yeah, at least. That's just want to point that out.
Hello, I've got Mike. Thank you very much for that overview. Very interesting. I have got a question. How much would you pay for, based on that consumer slideshow, how much would you pay for, if I was a leading sunglass manufacturer, like Ray-Ban, for example, and I could chip virtual reality into a pair of fashionable sunglasses, something that looked aesthetically pleasing and looked good and people looked good on it, I would have like a robot functioning blinker vision, you know, so that, and ideally like a dimmer button, so I could go from like normal reality through augmented reality or mixed reality into virtual reality, and I'd want those standalone. So I wouldn't want to have to, you know, compartmentalize like a rucksack alongside it or anything. I just want them in a case, simple things. I get them out, put on my VR. Maybe I would have like tech jewelry or tech clothing to go with it, but that might be optional, as it were. So what would you pay for those glasses or in 2025, for example?
Well, there's actually a company called North at the moment, Amazon-backed, I believe. Their glasses, they're not kind of full-on kind of AR at the moment, but it's very, very interesting that people are buying it, but they're priced at, I think, $999 or around $1,000. And they're not a known brand, but I know, for example, the user experience they apply is to be able to buy those glasses, you actually have to go into a store, have your head 3D scanned so that the glasses are to your size. But they're doing particularly well at the moment as a startup, and that's kind of the basis for now. But you know, I think in regards to things like an affordable price point for consumers, is Oculus is really smashing this at the moment and really getting it right with the Go, such as $199, and the Quest, which is going to be relatively affordable for your average consumer when you compare it to something like a PS4 or an Xbox Pro. So I think Oculus in particular, you can't go wrong with their pricing model at the moment. But it's very hard to gauge. In 2025, the technology is going to come so far, or much further than it is today, that it completely changes it. I don't know your thoughts on that, Steve.
No, I think you're right there. But I think the price point is mobile phones. How much are people going to pay for mobile phones? I think they'll pay the same for a good augmented reality or virtual reality headset. And of course, right now, that's anything from £300 to £1,200 if you're really an Apple fanboy. Yeah.
Okay.
Any more questions? Oh. Great, thanks.
You were speaking earlier about the university students going into the industry and then they have these gaming experience, but then need to learn how to apply these experiences, like specialize on whether it's the industry or whether it's aerospace and stuff. What are the current what are the current software and technologies that they're using that's different from what they're using in education and stuff? What are the kind of like the top ones that?
So you're talking about the software that the industries are using compared to students?
Compared to what the students are doing.
Well, funny enough, a lot of the top higher end companies are using things that you can get your access to right now, like Unreal and Unity. They're fantastic applications to be able to build on. And there's no real specialized software just for VR and AR just yet. There may be a few different things out there, but not industry standard per se. There's also things like Foundry are doing at the moment with new tools and stuff for filmmakers and being able to make it much easier. So there's applications out there that I'd suggest you look at, but more so than the software, I'd suggest more looking at case studies of experiences that have done extremely well. Games and applications that have kind of reached the top, like Beat Saber, like things from Alchemy Labs in terms of the games market, because at the end of the day, they're doing something right. Some of them did hit a bit of a gold rush or a opportunity there that they got in at the right time, but now they're using the research that they've got from those games to make it even better. So definitely look at the successful games within the market. You can take a look at the VR awards and look at our nominees list for 2018 as well, for example, and you can see some of the potentially award-winning games that are on there as well.
Yeah, and also that really sort of coding is still important. So a person like Kieran is one of the people who ask about the type of coding that's probably best for going forward. But probably C#, something like that, is probably one of the coding languages that it's really good to use. But of course, as Daniel says, it's a crossover as well between CGI work as well. So you're working in CGI, if you could work in some of the visual aspects as well, crossover from the film industry, that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. How you doing? It was a great presentation. I had a question around content and hardware. You mentioned earlier I think Steve mentioned it earlier in the first presentation, that once the hardware and the content comes together at a certain time, we're going to hit the sweet spot. Because at the moment, well, especially if you look at the industry 4 years ago, 2D content, gaming, obviously created a detrimental experience for VR. Now, based on your experience and insight in the industry, are you aware of volumetrics or any studios that are using volumetrics or volumetric capturing techniques and then embedding it into the VR world? It would be great to get your insight on any studios or any organizations that are, or pioneers that are pushing volumetrics.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously, Microsoft, they've got about 3 studios, I think, around the world. There's one studio in the UK based in Wimbledon. That's the first one outside America. And there are other companies, like a company called Double Me, which is working on sort of 3D capture of people in a very quick and I was going to say rough way, but that's the wrong word. But something that can be used really to create one of the things that's a holy grail, which is the holographic display. So I'd look out for Double Me. Albert Kim is the guy that runs that company. He's talked at a couple of our meetups, and I want to get him back here again, but he's touring the world because people are throwing money at him to actually sort of make sure this actually works. And Intel is the other big company that's into volumetrics. They've got a fantastic studio, which is really a sort of a big dome. It's huge. And there's some work being done on that. I was trying to think what. Oh yeah, they've actually created for the anniversary of Greece. They're doing Greece in 3D, and they filmed all the dancers with inside this dome and captured them volumetrically all at one go. So Microsoft, Intel, and smaller companies like DoubleMe definitely watch out for.
So I was just trying to find out who was one of the other companies. I think there's a pioneer in
well, there's ATI as well in New Zealand. Yeah, I think there's probably
Christina Heller as well. She used to work at VR Playhouse. They moved across to a volumetric studio that are doing fantastic things as well that I've seen. So there's a few different companies.
Yeah, because again, if somebody can crack it, they're onto something really big.
Yeah. Hi, sorry. I was going to actually touch on that as well. So my name's Harry. I work for Microsoft. I work on HoloLens, actually. And your question around volumetrics, you're completely right about these motion capture studios that we've got. We've got one in London, in fact. But there is a great application. A few people have talked about education today as well. Check out a company called Pearson, who do a lot of education-based stuff.
Yeah, used to.
We can talk about HoloPatient. Okay, so there's a fantastic application that I talk about a lot to healthcare kind of customers or healthcare education facilities as well, called HoloPatient, and it was captured in one of these motion capture studios, and it allows two different studios. Sorry, you probably know more about this than I do, so I might pass it over. But and actually, it was captured in a motion capture studio, and it allows the wearer of a HoloLens, in this example, to be able to see kind of different visual pathologies of certain issues that somebody might be suffering from. And I think they used a Game of Thrones makeup artist as well. Is that true? Or I hope. I mean, I've been saying that to people, so I hope that's true. But they use that, and you can actually walk around an individual who might be sat on the chair here, having like an asthma attack or something like that, to help you understand what the visual symptoms may be of a certain issue. So it's massively out there, and it's really big in education. We're seeing it quite a lot.
Yeah. I hope everybody here is real.
Yeah, definitely. I hope so too.
But it's great that you picked up on all the volumetric stuff there, because it is the future of kind of filmmaking in general. The only thing is we've got to overcome the storage problem, because I think something 10 petabytes of data can be produced from just one recording.
And I won't tell you how expensive it is to film at one of these studios, because it's eye-wateringly expensive.
Yeah, just to add to what my colleague there said, I think it's a really exciting technology for education. It is still at a very high price point, and also in terms of the file size, although in the work that we did, we were able to put 12 different scenarios, pathologies onto the HoloPatient product on the HoloLens. So it's not unrestricted, but you can still use it to quite a big extent. And I think it really offers a way of visualization for training and for education that you can't find in any other way. I think really, when you've tried that kind of product, when you've looked at the fidelity of what you can get, what you can produce using the volumetric, it's a very, very powerful experience.
Good. I think we've actually covered everything. I'd just like to do a shout out for a couple of things. Augmenting Reality News, which is a sort of interactive newspaper that actually runs parallel to these events, updated every week. And also for anybody that's in medical, I do one for medical as well. So it's everything in AI, AR, you name it, anything to do with that. It's actually sort of going to there. It's all completely free. And we actually aggregate lots of stories, usually about sort of 20 to 30 stories per week. So it just shows you the amount of stuff that's actually sort of coming in from around the world. I think that sort of brings us to a really nice conclusion. Thank you, Daniel.
No problem.
And obviously, sort of plug for the VR and AR Association, but also look at Daniel's new thing. I think that's really, really good. There's my handles if anybody wants to get hold of me. And the next meetup is here on the 27th of March Not quite sure what it's going to be because in actual fact, one of the things that sort of spun out from this evening was I got talking to the guys from Felix and Paul, and they're really keen on, in actual fact, actually coming and doing a whole evening about the type of work that they're doing. And just want to show you. This is the type of work that they do, just to whet your appetite, because it's not this stuff in space. Right, that's something else. That's the Blitz. Oh, where's Felix and Paul gone? Right, okay. Not that one.
What if you could explore the world like never before? What if you could travel to faraway lands in a heartbeat? What if you had a front row seat to all that's magical in our world? What if you could mystify your senses in ways you never thought possible? What if you witnessed your dreams up close? What if the unimaginable could come true? What if you discovered a whole new way to share stories and preserve memories? What if a universe of possibilities was suddenly in front of your eyes? Welcome to virtual reality.
So that's just a teaser. So I think their work is absolutely stunning, and I'll give you all lots of advance warning when I've actually managed to get them here, because they're very busy. So watch out for that. All it remains for me to say is thank you all for coming this evening. Hope you've enjoyed it. And so I'd like to say thank you to Matt and Kieran, to my guys at Medical Realities who helped set up this event, and also for Daniel for coming. And thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you.